I too rise to lend my support to this bill, shortly entitled the Anti-Proliferation, Financing and Weapons of Mass Destruction Bill, and to lend my voice to those that have come before who have explained in some detail what this bill is about and why it is relevant to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. As Minister with responsibility for foreign affairs, I have often said in this House that St. Kitts and Nevis, despite the fact that it's a small nation, nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, has the responsibility of behaving in a responsible way. And we have demonstrated over the years, certainly since this government has been in office and certainly since I have had the privilege of leading this particular ministry, that in our international relations we have been responsible. This legislation today is another manifestation of our effort to be a responsible member of the international community. I feel that it is important to put this in context, Mr. Speaker. St. Kitts and Nevis made headlines around the world just a few days ago because with the imprimatur of our cabinet, we agreed that we would ratify the nuclear ban treaty. Not only did we agree that we would ratify this treaty, but we agreed that we would ratify it, and we did so on August 9th, 2020. August 9th, 2020 was the 75th anniversary to the day of the bombing of Nagasaki. We would recall, certainly for me, from our history books, from others, perhaps they were alive at that time, but the United States, the Allies, would have dropped 2 bombs. One on Hiroshima on the 6th of August, 1945. The second on Nagasaki 3 days later on the 9th of August, 1945. And 75 years on, St. Kitts and Nevis joined with some other 44 nations who had hitherto ratified this convention to ratify the convention to ban nuclear weapons. It was significant because of the symbolism, Mr. Speaker, that as a small nation in the Caribbean Sea, and far removed from Japan, far removed from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we had used the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki to ratify this particular treaty. And our position has been clear, that we see no useful purpose for nuclear armaments in today's world. Nuclear weapons are, as the name suggests, weapons. They are weapons of mass destruction. And to put it in context, the bombing of Hiroshima on the 6th of August, 1945, would have led to the deaths of some 90 to 146,000 people. The bombing of Nagasaki would have led to the deaths of some 39,000 to 80,000 people. And as been explained, the reason why these numbers are arranged is because some died instantly and some died later from the effects of the radiation fallout. I believe that those 2 events triggered an alarming new development in our world, a development where nuclear weapons can destroy entire civilizations, and has led to the arms race that we have seen with major powers around the world. I must say, Mr. Speaker, that one of the ironies, perhaps, is that while St. Kitts and Nevis has joined some 44 other nations in ratifying the nuclear ban treaty, that Japan itself, the country that suffered from the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, has not yet itself ratified that treaty. It is also a matter of record that most of the countries that are part of the UN Security Council, who themselves are nuclear-armed countries, have not ratified this treaty. Notwithstanding, it is important to note for the record that the treaty now requires ratification of only 6 more countries in order for it to come into force. And I believe that when history is written, it will say that the people of St. Kitts and Nevis and the government of St. Kitts and Nevis was on the right side of history. To put this further in context, St. Kitts and Nevis on August 9th, a few days ago, this year, in ratifying the nuclear ban treaty, became the 8th member of CARICOM to do so, following Guyana, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, and Belize. Those are the countries that would have ratified before us, and we have now added to that, becoming the 8th member of CARICOM to have done so. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, forgive me, I feel that the ratification of the nuclear ban treaty by the government of St. Kitts and Nevis fits very nicely as a backdrop to why we're here today and what we're seeking to do. I've heard certainly the comments made. I will not propose to go through the details of the bill, but the bill, in essence, seeks to align us with international law and seeks to align us with UN Security Council resolutions as we seek together, collectively, to prevent not only nuclear armament, but also to prevent the proliferation of all weapons of mass destruction. And that, Mr. Speaker, is a very honorable objective because, as we know, nothing happens without financing. And we have oft been accused in these countries of the Caribbean of facilitating financing for illicit activities. And so for us, this is a tremendous stride forward to say to the region and the world that St. Kitts and Nevis is aligned with the best practices and the best intentions insofar as weapons of mass destruction are concerned. Mr. Speaker, I will raise, however, a concern, and that has to do with the freezing without delay. I am oft reminded on occasions like this that I did at some distant past work as a lawyer. And I'm always, therefore, looking at these matters with an eye to what lawyers might say. And perhaps this is a matter for the Honorable Attorney General. I will just raise in passing two brief matters. And they both have to do with Section 4 of the proposed legislation. Because, Mr. Speaker, we understand what the legislation is seeking to do. We understand that speed, urgency, haste, whichever word we might wish to use, is of relevance when, of course, a designation has come. But let us consider the impact of this legislation. And that impact is that once an individual has been designated, then this legislation is putting an onus, and I quote from Section 4.1, where the UN Security Council, UNSC, designates persons or entities pursuant to the UN Security Council resolutions set out in subsection 1, or any other UNC resolutions that relate to the prevention or disruption of the financing of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, all natural and legal persons. And all that means for members of the public, a natural person, someone like me. A legal person is a company or some corporate entity. All natural and legal persons within St. Christopher and Nevis shall freeze without delay or prior notice. And it goes on to say that you shall freeze the assets, etc. I raise it, Mr. Speaker, because there is, of course, the issue of due process. And I'm sure the Honorable Attorney General would have addressed his mind to it. But the question of a designation coming and we simply freeze somebody's assets, those assets might well be what I rely on to live. And the question that would arise in those circumstances is what would be the position if that designation ultimately is discharged or if that designation turns out to have been incorrect. So I think that that is something that we ought to be mindful of. The second thing I think we ought to be mindful of is that the Honorable Attorney General under the legislation becomes the focal point. I'm not sure if that's the language that's employed, but becomes the entity, competent authority in relation to anything done under this legislation. And as the competent authority, he is given tremendous power to do certain things. But we have not indemnified him in any way, nor have we indemnified those natural or legal persons whom Section 4 mandates must freeze without delay or prior notice whenever that designation is received. So I raise those two issues as we try to certainly support and advance the legislative agenda and the position of St. Kitts and Nevis as a legitimate, responsible member of the international community, that we ought at the same time to ensure that those who are caused to act under this legislation are protected when they so act. And to put that in, perhaps, to break it down a bit, Mr. Speaker, so that my point is pellucid, it would be, for example, a situation where National Bank, our largest bank, gets an indication that Mr. Smith has been designated, and immediately, without notice, without delay, freezes Mr. Smith's accounts. Now, is National Bank protected if it turns out that that was an erroneous action on the part of National Bank? And I believe that that type of indemnity should have a place so that when National Bank acts, it knows that there are no implications for it insofar as any lawsuits may come. I say that because, of course, suing is the biggest business now in St. Kitts and Nevis. So we have to be careful that the suits, when they come, that they don't fit, because that might lead, Mr. Speaker, to certain problems for us. So I raise those points just in passing, but also to, of course, highlight my support for this bill and to congratulate the mover for bringing this bill at this time, which I think sends the correct signal on the heels of our ratification of the nuclear ban treaty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.